Hey everyone, this is a video on the idea of brown complicity, brown fragility, and brown privilege. Now, these are ideas that are offshoots of critical race theory, and they play off things like white privilege and white fragility, and then complicity and racism. Um, but to discuss this, I'm also going to talk about the ideas of BIPOC and interest convergence because they fit in with this. Now, I'm taking all the definitions I'm using from a website called DIscourses. That is a website that James Lindsay had started, and it's basically it's a great place to go and get information about critical race theory, intersectionality, some of the gender stuff that's coming out, fat studies, disability studies. It's a good resource for all this critical social justice stuff that's coming out. And it's a good way to understand what's going on. I'm going to be using those terms, but then I'll try to match them into real life situations. Anyways, we're going to start with the term BIPOC because I think this is where it all comes from. So this is from the BIPOC Project. This is their mission statement. The BIPOC Project aims to build authentic and lasting solidarity among Black, Indigenous, and people of color in order to undo Native invisibility, anti-Blackness, dismantle white supremacy, and advance racial justice, which sounds okay. We use the term BIPOC to highlight the unique relationship to whiteness that Indigenous and Black people have, which shapes the experiences of and relationship to white supremacy for all people of color within the United States. Within a U.S. context, we unapologetically focus on and center relationships among BIPOC folks. So BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, or Black and Indigenous and People of Color. Now it's also sometimes being referred to as IBPOC, I guess, Indigenous, Black, and People of Color. Basically, this is out of intersectionality, so it's just how you've been oppressed and who's been oppressed more. So in a U.S. context, Black and Indigenous people have been oppressed more than other peoples of color. Okay, so they're breaking everything down into who's been more oppressed. So they're saying Black and Indigenous people have been more oppressed than people of color, and therefore people of color are more privileged, and that's where the brown fragility comes in, and we can get to that. So the idea of brown complicity is basically, okay, it's not just that you are actively being complicit in something, you're helping it, you're doing it. Just by participating in the system, you're complicit in letting that system flourish, and you're complicit in the racism of that system. So if you look at critical race theory, you can go back to Derek Bell's book, Faces at the Bottom of the Well and the Permanence of Racism. You can look at the book Critical Race Theory by Delgado, Ibram Kendi's book. Robert DiAngelo says it. I mean, that racism is a permanent part of society, and it is, it's never going away. It's always there. So basically, what they're saying is that brown people have learned through socialization, through the white supremacist system, they've learned it's like the Calvinist idea of total depravity. The whole system is soaked in sin in this case, which is whiteness and white supremacy, and so that unless you're very careful and live a very, very pure life, you're gonna be imbued with it. So brown people, because they face racism, they think they're, according to this anyways, they think that they can't be racist because they're being oppressed, but because they haven't been oppressed as much as Black and Indigenous people, they're slightly less oppressed, and so they can also then oppress the other peoples of color that are more oppressed. That's where this comes from. So if I'll give an example in Canada. Sikhs have been in Canada for generations. There's some Sikh families, I think they can go back 4 or 5 generations. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but Vancouver has the largest Sikh population outside of India. And again, there's been families that have been there several generations. So if there's a Sikh person alive there today whose family goes back 4 generations, and they still wear the turban if they're a man, they go to the Gurdwara, they they speak Punjabi at home. They eat Indian food, but at the same time, they have white friends. They play hockey. They go do everything else that a white Canadian would do. They started a business that's successful, or they've gone to school, done well, got a job. They're successful. They're raising a family. They're saying that these people are complicit in racism because they're taking on the system and they're acting white. This is just pure centralizing racism because they're saying that they're not acting like brown people should. A family that's been in Canada 3 or 4 generations, and if they have family in India, if they go back to India, yes, you're going to notice cultural differences, and it's obvious they grew up in different places. But to say that the Sikh family, a 3rd or 4th generation Sikh family in Canada is acting white and not acting brown because they work hard and they succeed, it's ridiculous. And then you get the idea of brown fragility. Brown fragility is, this is from DIscourses. Brown fragility is a concept that exists in parallel to this and is rooted similarly to the ideas of brown silence, brown complicity, and according to critical race theory, whiteness is intrinsically exhibits a trait called anti-blackness, and brownness also carries this trait by virtue of being outside of blackness. So it's either you're racist or you're anti-racist. You're either for, you're not. If you're not within blackness, you're anti. You're part of anti-blackness or anti-black. Joe Biden famously saying, if you don't vote for him, you ain't black. Well, that's where this comes from. And so, again, this is part of the BIPOC thing. This is part of the intersection thing. Who is being oppressed more and who hasn't? Now, brown fragility is, so when if a black person tells a brown person this, or I guess a woke white person tells a brown person this, and the brown person denies it, well, that's their fragility because you're not, or you're getting defensive and you don't want to hear about the harm you're causing, and so it's the same idea as white fragility. It's kind of ridiculous. And now then you have brown privilege, which is, again, it's a little bit more complicated than white privilege because, well, if it's a white supremacist system, white people are more privileged. Again, going back to fishes at the bottom of the well, Derek Bell says that even for the most socially unacceptable white, the most, like the richest black person will still be a face at the bottom of the well that a homeless drug addict white person can look down at. And so, a homeless drug addict white person can look down and see Obama as a face at the bottom of the well because that drug addict white person is more privileged than Obama. Now, brown privilege is, it's that you are privileged because you aren't as oppressed, and you hear the idea of model minority. South Asians come here, they work hard, they start businesses there. So the people, you'll say, oh, well, they're being held up, they're being tokenized, whatever. But again, if it's a family that's been here 3 or 4 generations, I don't know where that comes in then. But so that, this is an incredibly racist and depressing way of looking at things, and it's, you're not. You say you want people to have better lives, but when they do it, you're saying, well, you're not doing it on our terms. You're only doing it on the white person's terms. But I'm sorry, working hard is not a white people thing. Hard work has been rewarded throughout history, and it's not just because of white people. So, those are those 3 concepts, and like some real world examples of this. And it's luckily this was voted down in California, but they had a thing called Prop 16, which would make it legal, which would have made it legal for the government to be able to discriminate based upon race. And it was, the reasoning behind this was that there are more Asians getting into good colleges, there were more Asians getting into government jobs, and there were not enough black people, and because more Asians were getting in, this was helping white supremacy. So it was brown complicity and white supremacy. An add-on to this, it's a side thing. They also have yellow privilege and yellow complicity because of East Asians. So when they say Asians, they're talking South and East Asians. And I mean, in Virginia, the school system is changing the way they do admissions. You can follow Asra Namani on Twitter. She's trying to fight for the high school where her son goes, and this is apparently the best high school in the United States. It is a public high school. It is, it's for gifted STEM students. But again, they're saying too many Asians is helping to lead to white supremacy. Harvard is being sued by Asian students right now. I believe that's going to go to the Supreme Court. In New York City, it's the same thing. They want to change the way they do admissions. You had a member, I don't know if she was a city councilwoman or she was a member of the state legislature or part of the school board, but she basically said that Asians weren't really people of color because they were doing so well. So like I said, this is really, really insidious stuff. It harms people. It's completely divisive. It's dividing who's been more oppressed, who hasn't. On a personal level, like this, for someone like myself, my family moved here from India when I was 6 years old. So, my dad started a business. My mom started working. My mom worked hard. She advanced. My dad's business did really well. We lived a comfortable life. But because we immigrated to a country that was started by colonialism, forget the fact that we came here from India, and India was colonized and didn't get its independence until 47, 48. They're saying that my family then are now siding with the colonizers because we came into this colonial system, so we're helping keep indigenous and black people down because, we're coming in and working with this in the colonial system. And these are the same people who want more immigration. But what do they want the immigrants to do? Not work? Not succeed? Like my parents came here to give me and my brother and sister a better life. They didn't come here just to not do anything. It's absolutely ridiculous. Then there's, again, like I said, this is incredibly divisive stuff. And if you start hearing this or seeing it, just ask them straight out, plain definitions, what they mean. I urge you to go to DIscourses, check out their entries on this stuff. They also have a reading list. I'll put a link to the entries for Brown Complicity, Brown Fragility, Brown Privilege, and also put a link to a reading list that James has put together with Helen Pluckrose. And it gives you books you can read, articles you can read, on the ideas of critical race theory and intersectionality and some of the gender stuff and fat studies and disability studies and all this. And it's how the discourse is being shaped around this. Also, as for myself, I'll be doing more videos coming up. And basically, I think what I'm going to be doing for the next little bit is taking some of the diversity trainings from governments and schools that's being leaked on the internet and go through the concepts and maybe give you suggestions on how to push back or at least question it at work or at school, anything like that. Well, thanks everyone for watching, and I'll be back.